I woke up to the faint creak of my bedroom door opening. My son stood there in the dim light, his silhouette small and fragile against the hallway's glow. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling in a way that made my heart clench. "I need to talk to you." I glanced at the clock. 2:14 a.m. This was unlike him. He was a teenager now, far too old for midnight confessions about monsters under the bed. Something about his tone pulled me from the haze of sleep. As I sat up, rubbing my eyes, I caught the flash of tears on his cheeks. My chest tightened. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, reaching out. What he said next shattered the fragile stillness of the night and set in motion a chain of revelations I wasn't prepared for. "Mom, I think Dad is hiding something from us. I'm Caroline, a 37-year-old mother of two. My husband, Michael, and I have been married for 15 years. We built a life together in a modest suburban neighborhood where everything feels familiar. Our creaky front porch, the smell of freshly cut grass wafting through the open windows, the steady rhythm of life with kids. Our son, Ethan, is 15, tall and lanky, with a mop of sandy brown hair that constantly falls into his eyes. He's always been quiet, a thinker rather than a talker. He observes everything, often picking up on things most people miss. Our younger daughter, Lily, is 8, a whirlwind of energy and joy who never misses a chance to make her presence known. Michael has always been the steady one. He works long hours as an accountant, his life defined by spreadsheets and deadlines. I'm the opposite, a stay-at-home mom who thrives on the chaos of school runs, bake sales, and bedtime stories. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but nothing ever felt insurmountable. Until recently. Lately, Michael has been distant. He's working later than usual, brushing off my questions with vague excuses. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Tax season was looming, after all. But there were little things I couldn't ignore. His phone always turned face down, hushed calls in the middle of the night, and a faraway look in his eyes even when he was sitting right next to me. Still, I told myself it was nothing. You don't just start doubting the person you've shared your life with, not without reason. The night Ethan came into my room, I had been dreaming about the beach, warm sand beneath my feet, waves crashing in the distance. The cool air of the bedroom, tinged with the faint scent of Michael's cologne lingering on the sheets, snapped me back to reality. Ethan's eyes were red-rimmed, and his hands fidgeted nervously at his sides. I could feel his unease, a heavy tension that filled the space between us. "What's going on, Ethan?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. He hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. "It's about Dad," he said finally, his voice barely audible. I saw something, and I don't know what to do." My pulse quickened. The warmth of the dream was gone, replaced by a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Whatever Ethan had to say, I could tell it was going to change everything. Ethan sat on the edge of my bed, his shoulders hunched as if he were carrying the weight of the world. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, loud and unrelenting. "Ethan," I prompted gently, leaning closer. "What did you see?" He hesitated, chewing on his bottom lip the way he used to when he was little and afraid to tell me about a bad grade. Finally, he exhaled shakily. "Dad's been texting someone," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I saw him at the kitchen counter last night. He didn't hear me come in. He was smiling at his phone. When I asked him who he was texting, he acted all weird and put it away." I blinked, trying to process his words. "That doesn't mean anything," I said automatically, though the words felt hollow. "Maybe it was work, or—" "It wasn't work, Mom," Ethan interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "I'm not a kid anymore. I know what I saw." And then, he hesitated, his face crumpling. "Then I heard him on the phone earlier tonight. He didn't know I was in the hallway. He was whispering, saying things like, 'I miss you,' and 'I'll figure out a way.'" My stomach dropped. The knot of dread that had been forming since Michael's late nights and secretive behavior now felt like a fist clenching my insides. I tried to keep my voice steady for Ethan's sake. "Are you sure you heard him right? Maybe it was a friend or—" Ethan shook his head, cutting me off. Mom, you don't say stuff like that to a friend. I sat there, stunned, as his words echoed in the quiet room. My mind raced, trying to rationalize, to make sense of what he'd just told me. Michael had always been the dependable one. The thought of him being unfaithful felt absurd, like a story that belonged to someone else's life, not mine. But the signs were there, weren't they? The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the growing distance between us. I had seen them, but I hadn't wanted to put the pieces together. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked, my voice trembling. I didn't want to believe it, Ethan admitted, his face crumpling. But I thought you should know. I reached out, pulling him into a hug. He felt so small in my arms, like the little boy who used to run to me after scraping his knee. You did the right thing telling me, I murmured, though my heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. That night, after Ethan went back to his room, I lay awake in the dark, my mind a storm of doubts and fears. Every memory of Michael, the way he used to surprise me with flowers, the nights we stayed up laughing over wine, felt tainted now, like a photo smeared with fingerprints. The next morning, I watched Michael carefully. He was at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone, his expression unreadable. The sunlight streaming through the window cast shadows on his face, making him look like a stranger. Late night at work again? I asked, trying to sound casual as I poured myself a cup of coffee. He glanced up, his eyes briefly meeting mine. Yeah, the clients are a nightmare right now, he said with a sigh, running a hand through his hair. I studied him, searching for cracks in the facade. Was he lying? Or was I just being paranoid? Later, when he left for work, I couldn't resist. I grabbed his laptop, my hands trembling as I opened it. He had always trusted me with his passwords, and I knew them by heart. I clicked on his email first. Nothing unusual. Then I checked his messages. My stomach lurched when I saw a folder labeled drafts. Inside were unsent messages, each one addressed to someone named L. The first one was brief. I can't stop thinking about you. When can we talk? The second was longer, more intimate. I hate sneaking around like this, but I don't know what else to do. I miss you so much. Please don't give up on me. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving. This wasn't just my imagination. This was real. My hands shook as I tried to process the betrayal staring back at me. Who was Elle? How long had this been going on? The love I thought I shared with Michael suddenly felt like a fragile illusion, cracking under the weight of secrets. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was knowing that Ethan had seen it too, and that, in his own way, he was already starting to lose faith in his father. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my mind reeling from what I'd found. I debated confronting Michael immediately, but decided to wait. I needed to be sure, to hear it from him directly. But as the hours crawled by, the weight of my discovery pressed harder on my chest. That evening after dinner, I asked Michael to join me in the living room. Ethan and Lily had retreated to their rooms, leaving us in tense silence. Michael looked puzzled but followed me, his brow furrowed as he sat across from me on the couch. Is something wrong? He asked, his voice steady, but I noticed the subtle twitch in his jaw. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering in my chest. Who was Elle? His eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he caught himself. It was brief, but I saw it. A flicker of panic. I don't know what you're talking about, he said too quickly. Don't lie to me, Michael, I said, my voice trembling. I saw the emails, the drafts. I know you've been talking to someone. Someone you care about. The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Michael leaned back, running a hand down his face. Caroline, it's not what you think, he began, but I cut him off. Then tell me what it is, I said, my voice rising. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me. Lying to all of us. He hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he might deny it again. But then he sighed. A long, weary sound that seemed to drain the fight out of him. Her name is Laura, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. Laura, I repeated, the name foreign and bitter on my tongue. She's someone I knew years ago. Before you and I got together, he said, his eyes fixed on the floor. We reconnected a few months ago. It was innocent at first, Just emails catching up. But it became more. More. The word came out like a hiss, sharp and cold. How much more, Michael? Are you in love with her? He looked at me then, and the guilt in his eyes was like a knife to my heart. I don't know, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't mean for this to happen, Caroline. I swear. But things between us, between you and me, they've felt so distant lately. And with her, it felt easy. Like I could breathe again. His words hit me like a slap. Distant. I'd been here, holding everything together while he worked late, while he grew more and more detached. And now he was blaming me? You felt distant, I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Do you have any idea how hard I've been trying to keep this family together? How much I've given up to support you? And instead of talking to me, you run to someone else? I didn't mean to hurt you, he said, his eyes pleading. But you did, I shot back. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt Ethan. He knows, Michael. He heard you. He saw you. That seemed to shake him. Ethan knows, he asked, his voice cracking. Yes, I said. And do you know what he said to me last night? He said he doesn't know if he can trust you anymore. Do you have any idea what that feels like, for your son to say that? Michael buried his face in his hands, and for a moment, I thought I saw tears. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. I stood, my legs trembling but steady enough to carry me to the door. I need time, I said, my voice cold. Time to figure out what this means for us, for our family. Because right now, I don't even know who you are anymore. As I walked away, the weight of his betrayal settled over me like a heavy cloak. But beneath the pain, there was a flicker of something else, determination. I couldn't control what Michael had done, but I could control what came next. For me, for Ethan, for Lily. And for the first time, I realized that moving forward might not include the man I thought I'd spend my life with. The days that followed felt like moving through a fog. Michael stayed at a friend's house to give me space, though the distance didn't lessen the ache. Ethan barely spoke to either of us, retreating into himself in a way I'd never seen before. And Lily, too young to understand, clung to me like a lifeline, sensing that something was deeply wrong. In the stillness of the evenings, after the kids were asleep, I'd sit in the quiet of the living room, replaying everything in my mind. How had we gotten here? Was it something I'd done or not done? Or was it simply the inevitable drift of two people trying to navigate the chaos of life, forgetting to tend to what brought them together in the first place? One afternoon, Ethan sat down beside me, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. Is Dad coming back? He asked, his voice small, almost afraid. I looked at him, my heart breaking all over again. I don't know, I said honestly. But no matter what happens between your dad and me, I need you to know something. None of this is your fault. And no matter what, we'll get through it. Together. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor, and I reached out to pull him into a hug. He resisted at first, but then he melted into me, his arms wrapping tightly around my waist. Michael and I finally sat down a week later. There were tears, apologies, and long, difficult conversations. He admitted that he didn't know what he wanted, and for the first time in years, I realized I didn't either. We agreed to try counseling, not as a way to repair what had been broken, but to understand if it was even possible. In the quiet moments, when the house was still, I'd think about the person I used to be before marriage, before kids. I'd wonder if this was an opportunity to rediscover her, to rebuild myself in a way I hadn't considered before. I don't know where we'll go from here. Maybe Michael and I will find our way back to each other, or maybe we won't. What I do know is this: love is complicated. It's messy, imperfect, and sometimes it breaks in ways you can't fix. But even in the brokenness, there's a chance to grow, to find strength, clarity, and maybe even a version of happiness you didn't know you were capable of before.